Hello guys, welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be discussing the venous sinuses. Okay, now you already know the dural folds of the brain. Now we will go to discuss the venous sinuses, which are important venous structures that carries the deoxygenated blood within the circulation inside the brain and the central nervous system specifically. Now, first, an interview about the dural venous sinuses. Dural venous sinuses are structures that are located in the cranial cavity. They are between the endosteal and between, this is the dura mater, okay? And here is the arachnoid mater, and this is the pia mater. This is a part of the cerebral cortex. Now you can see that the venous sinuses are venous structures that are located between the endosteal layer of the dura mater and between this one here, which is the meningeal layer of the dura mater. Now these venous structures are actually lined with endothelial cells, as you can see, and their main function is to receive and to collect the deoxygenated blood coming from the brain itself via different veins of the brain, different cerebral and cerebellar veins of the brain, and also they collect the cerebrospinal fluid that is located within the subarachnoid space, which get inside via the arachnoid granulations. Now we can just summarize this part by saying that it carries the deoxygenated blood, and also it carries the cerebrospinal fluid from the brain. Now ultimately this will lead to these venous structures will end in the internal jugular veins, which are located in the neck and which will drive the blood down the neck into the right atrium of the heart. Now these, as I said, are lined with endothelium, and they have walls, and this endothelium cells are making thick layer, protecting them and providing an impermeable part of the blood, but at the same time they do not have any muscular structures in their wall. Now before I get into specific details about each sinus, I will mention a small point of something known as the emissary veins. These emissary veins are actually venous structures that are located between that connect the scalpel into the venous structures inside the cranium. Now you can see this is here a superficial vein of the skull, and it communicates via this emissary vein. Emissary means a messenger, so it transfers the blood from outside of the scalp into the inside of the cranial cavity via the emissary vein, and then diploic veins, which are the veins that run in pairs, diploic veins within the skull bone. Then the blood drives inside via the emissary veins into these venous structures. Now before starting with them, I have to say that I divided these venous structures according to their presence. So we have two types of these venous structures. We have the ones that we have the paired venous structures and the singular venous structures. Now the paired are actually located on the right and on the left sides of the brain. However, the singular are located within the midline. So they are singular and located in the midline of the brain. Now, starting with the venous structures, I will start with the superior sagittal sinus. Now, the superior sagittal sinus, for each one of the sinuses, I will discuss the location, the termination, the course, and the origin, and the tributaries, and if there is any special parts, I will mention them during the explanation. So first, the superior sagittal sinus. Now this superior sagittal sinus, it is one of the most important venous sinuses. Of course, I'm starting with the singular, not the paired. So it is in the midline, as you can see. This is another picture for the superior sagittal sinus. It runs, the origin is from the anteriorly, it originates here from the foramen cecum, and it may sometimes receive a vein via the foramen cecum from the nasal cavity inside the anterior part of the cranium. So this is a top view. This is the view. This one is the norma verticalis interna. Okay, so it extends from anteriorly from here, and it terminates at the posterior internal protuberance of the occipital bone all the way. It passes from here and it curves like this, ending here posteriorly. Now the termination is most commonly, not always, but most commonly it terminates deviating to the right, becoming the right transverse sinus that I will explain later on. The course is, as you can see, it has an arch course, and the location is inside the upper margin of the falx, the attached border of the falx cerebri. Now this is the falx cerebri, and it's located in the attached upper margin of the falx cerebri, one of the dural folds. Okay, now the tributaries of the superior sagittal sinus, they include veins. We have different veins. First, this is the superior sagittal sinus in this view, and also this is the superior sagittal sinus. We have here small veins that drains the blood, the deoxygenated blood from the cerebral hemispheres. They are called the superior cerebral veins, and they drain into the superior sagittal sinus. We also have, as I mentioned, the diploic veins. Any venous structures that is located near to the bone, it drains the diploic veins, and also here in this case it drains the meningeal veins, some of the meningeal vessels that drain into the superior sagittal sinus. Now, importantly for this sinus, as I mentioned, we have here the arachnoid granulation, which also drains the cerebrospinal fluid, one of the most important pathway of drainage and of absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid within the subarachnoid space. That's it for the superior sagittal sinus. Now I'll go for the inferior sagittal sinus. The inferior sagittal sinus is quite simple. It has a course. This is a cross section through the brain. You can see here, this is the medial surface of the right hemisphere, of cerebral hemisphere. You can see this is the inferior sagittal sinus, which run in a course resembling the superior sagittal sinus, starting from here and ending, terminating, joining the internal cerebral veins. Now this venous sinus here, the inferior sagittal sinus, run in the inferior or free border of the falx cerebri. As you can see here, this is the inferior sagittal sinus. It is lined completely with the meningeal layer of the dural fold of the falx cerebri. The inferior sagittal sinus, it drains, as we said, the superior drains the superior cerebral veins. So you can think of it like the inferior will drain the inferior cerebral veins. And it also joins this great cerebral vein, forming the straight sinus, which I will discuss right now. This next one. So that's all for the cerebral vein, the inferior sagittal sinus. Now the next sinus is the straight sinus, which you can know the origin, or already you know the origin, which is the termination of the inferior sagittal sinus joining the internal cerebral veins, forming this straight sinus, cutting the name from its course, which is actually straight ahead from this area here, from this point, till joining the this specific important landmark, which is located to the just adjacent to the if you can see in this picture, this is a bony landmark. You can see here, this is the internal occipital protuberance, and it is the site of termination of the superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, and straight sinus. And at the same time, and also we have a small sinus, which is the occipital sinus, and also it terminates at this area. And we have formation of one new sinuses, one on the right and one on the left, which is the transverse, right transverse, and left transverse sinuses. So this area have a lot of meeting of different sinuses. We call it the confluence of sinuses. This is the confluence of sinuses in this area. Now returning back to the straight sinus, It is actually not long, it is short, and it is located in the junction of the falx cerebri, which have here it protrudes here between the hemispheres, and joins here the tentorium cerebelli, which make like a tent over the between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Now, the inferior sagittal sinus and the great cerebral veins are the origin of the straight sinus, and the termination, as I said, in the confluence of sinuses. But most commonly, not always, but most commonly, it will the straight sinus will come from inside, and it will continue as here, as you can see, as the left transverse sinus. This is the right transverse sinus originating from the superior sagittal sinus, but the straight sinus originate and deviate to the left, forming the left transverse sinus. And ultimately, both of these sinuses will join together in the confluence of sinuses, as I said. Now, the last one from the singular or middle or midline vein, venous dural venous sinuses is the occipital sinus, which is a very small sinus located at this area here. It originates draining the paravertebral veins. Here we have the foramen magnum and the start of the spinal cord, and at the surrounding we have these paravertebral sinuses, which here, and they are drained by this occipital sinus, and it joins the confluence of sinuses terminating in it, and it have very little drainage, draining some parts of the lower parts of the cerebellum. That's all for the singular veins, and I hope you get information for the singular veins, and see you next time in another video which explains the paired venous sinuses.